The day I decided to destroy my family's legacy started like any other Thursday morning at Graham Technologies. I stood in the doorway of my brother Emiliano's corner office, watching him dismiss my latest proposal without even looking up from his phone. Ruby, we've been over this. The company doesn't need a digital transformation right now. We're doing fine the old-fashioned way. I'm Ruby Graham, and I've spent 30 years being the family's afterthought, the daughter they never quite knew what to do with. Our competitors are eating into our market share, I pressed, gripping my tablet tighter. We're losing clients because our systems are outdated. I can show you the numbers. Little sister, Emiliano cut me off with that condescending smile I'd grown to hate. Stick to what you're good at. The IT department is cute, but leave the big decisions to those who understand business. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. 3 degrees in computer science and business, and he still treated me like I was 12. My phone buzzed. A message from Valerie. How'd it go? I walked out without another word to my brother. In the elevator, I texted back. Same old story. Meeting for coffee? 20 minutes later, I sat across from Valerie at our usual spot, stirring my latte perhaps a bit too aggressively. I swear, Val, sometimes I think they kept me in IT just to have someone to blame when their computers crash, I said, running a hand through my hair. Valerie leaned forward, her eyes intense. Then why are you still there? Ruby, I've seen your work. The algorithms you developed for their security system. That's genius-level stuff. It's the family business, I sighed. Dad always said, Your dad handed everything to your brothers on a silver platter, Valerie interrupted. And now Emiliano's running it into the ground while Hayden plays yes man. My other brother Hayden at least had the decency to look uncomfortable during board meetings. But he never stood up to Emiliano either. You should see the books, I muttered, lowering my voice. We're hemorrhaging money, but nobody wants to admit it. Dad's retired, but still thinks everything's fine because Emiliano keeps feeding him BS reports. So what are you going to do about it? I looked up, surprised by the challenge in Valerie's voice. What can I do? I'm just the little sister who graduated top of her class at MIT. Valerie cut in, who developed 3 patented security protocols before turning 25, who could probably build a better company from scratch if she wasn't so busy playing the good daughter. I stared into my coffee, letting her words sink in. My phone buzzed again. A message from Sarah, our family advisor. Your brother rejected another major client. We need to talk. They'll never take me seriously, I said quietly. Not while I'm under their roof. Valerie reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Then maybe it's time to build your own roof. I looked at my best friend, really looked at her. Valerie had been trying to get me to partner with her on a startup for months. I'd always refused, citing family loyalty. What if... I started slowly, an idea taking shape. What if we did it in secret? Built something of our own while I stay at Graham Tech, gathering intel? Valerie's eyes lit up. Now you're thinking like a CEO. They'd never see it coming, I continued, feeling a spark of excitement for the first time in years. They don't even bother reading tech news. They wouldn't notice until you're too big to ignore, Valerie finished, grinning. My phone buzzed one more time. A group text from Dad. Family dinner tonight, attendance mandatory. Your mother's making pot roast. I showed Valerie the message and rolled my eyes. Another chance to hear about how amazing my brothers are. Perfect, Valerie said. Go, play the part. But starting tomorrow, we're building your empire. I sat back, a plan forming in my mind. You know what? You're right. I'm done being the family disappointment. It's time they learned what their little IT girl can really do. That's my girl, Valerie raised her coffee cup. To new beginnings? I clinked my cup against hers, feeling something shift inside me. To new beginnings. And maybe, just maybe, to making them regret ever underestimating me. As we left the coffee shop, I was already mentally drafting business plans. They thought keeping me in IT was keeping me in my place. They never considered that from my little corner of their kingdom, I could see everything. Every weakness, every vulnerability, every mistake. They'd learn soon enough. The black sheep of the family was about to become their worst nightmare. 6 months flew by like a caffeine-fueled fever dream. By day, I played the dutiful sister at Graham Technologies. By night, Valerie and I built our startup, Ruby Secure, from the ground up in her garage-turned-office. "Another all-nighter?" Valerie asked, sliding a fresh coffee across our makeshift desk. "Really just an old door balanced on sawhorses." "Worth it," I said, spinning my laptop around. "Look at these test results. Our AI security protocol just caught every single breach attempt in the simulation." Valerie leaned in, her eyes widening. "Ruby, this is incredible. Traditional firewalls didn't even detect half of these threats." "And that's not even the best part," I grinned, pulling up another window. "It adapts. Every attack makes it stronger. It's exactly what I tried to implement at Graham Tech, but Emiliano said it was unnecessarily complex." My phone buzzed, speaking of the devil. A text from Hayden. "Em's calling an emergency board meeting. Something about Q3 projections." "Go," Valerie said before I could speak. "Keep up appearances. I'll finish the investor pitch deck." 2 hours later, I sat in Graham Tech's plush boardroom, watching Emiliano tap dance around the fact that we'd lost 3 major clients in 2 months. "It's just a temporary setback," he assured the board, shooting me a glare when I snorted quietly. "Our traditional approach has served us well for 30 years. Traditional won't cut it anymore," I spoke up, earning surprised looks from around the table. "Our competitors are offering AI-driven solutions while we're still pushing manual monitoring." "Here we go again," Emiliano rolled his eyes. "Ruby, not everything needs to be automated. Our clients appreciate the human touch." "Really?" I pulled up an email on my tablet. "Is that why MaxiCorp just jumped ship to next-gen security? Their CEO specifically cited our outdated infrastructure as the reason." Sarah, our advisor, nodded grimly. "She has a point, Emiliano. We can't ignore." "I'm not taking technical advice from my baby sister," Emiliano snapped. "This meeting is adjourned." Later that evening, my phone lit up with an unknown number. "Ruby Graham?" "Speaking. This is Marcus Thompson from Venture Capital Partners. Your friend Valerie sent over your pitch deck. I'd love to discuss it further. Are you free for lunch tomorrow?" I stepped into my apartment's hallway, heart pounding. "Absolutely, Mr. Thompson. Please call me Marcus. I have to say your AI security solution is unlike anything I've seen. The adaptive learning capabilities alone." The next day, Valerie and I sat across from Marcus in a high-end restaurant, watching him flip through our business plan. "Your prototype results are impressive," he said, setting down his fork. "But what makes you sure you can compete with established players?" I pulled out my tablet. "Because I know exactly what they're missing. Take Graham Technologies, for instance. Their market share has dropped 15% in the last quarter because they refuse to innovate. Their clients are desperate for exactly what we're offering." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You seem very familiar with their operations." "I should be," I smiled. "I'm their head of IT. Or at least, I am for now." "Isn't that a conflict of interest?" "Not at all. I developed this technology independently on my own time. Everything's properly documented and legally clear." Marcus sat back, studying me. "You know, most people would be afraid to go up against a family business. Most people haven't spent their entire careers being underestimated by their own family." He nodded slowly, then reached for his briefcase. "Well, Ms. Graham, I think we might have something here. How does 5 million in seed funding sound for starters?" Valerie gripped my arm under the table as I maintained my composure. "That sounds like a good beginning." Later that night, as we celebrated in our garage office, Valerie raised her champagne glass. "To Ruby Secure's first big break. To showing them what unnecessarily complex can do," I clinked my glass against hers. My phone buzzed. Hayden again. "Ruby, things are worse than Em's letting on. Any chance we could talk? Privately?" I showed Valerie the message. She smirked. "Looks like someone's finally noticing the ship is sinking." "Should I meet with him?" "Absolutely. The more intel, the better." I texted back. "Tomorrow, coffee shop on 5th, 8 a.m. Valerie topped off our glasses. "You know, your brothers are going to lose their minds when they realize what you've built." I thought about Emiliano's dismissive smirk, about years of being relegated to the kids' table at family functions, about every time they'd talked over me in meetings. Good, I said, raising my glass again. It's about time they realised their baby sister grew up. The prototype hummed quietly in the corner, its screens displaying a steady stream of caught threats. Soon, very soon, they'd all see exactly what I was capable of. I arrived early at the coffee shop, choosing a corner table where I could watch Hayden's approach through the window. He showed up exactly on time, looking more dishevelled than I'd ever seen him. "Thanks for meeting me," he said, slumping into the chair. I didn't know who else to talk to. "What's going on, Hayden?" He glanced around before leaning forward. "We're in trouble, Ruby. Real trouble. Emiliano's been cooking the books." I kept my face neutral, though my heart raced. "How bad? Bad enough that if the board finds out, we're done?" He ran a hand through his hair. "We've been operating at a loss for months. Em's been moving money around to hide it, but you can't hide red ink forever," I finished. "There's more." Hayden's voice dropped even lower. "Remember that big government contract Em was bragging about at dinner last month?" I nodded, taking a sip of coffee. He faked the security certification requirements. If anyone audits us... My phone buzzed. A text from Savannah, Emiliano's wife. "Need to talk. It's urgent. Lunch today." "Does Savannah know?" I asked Hayden. He shook his head. "Em doesn't tell her anything anymore, but she's not stupid. She's been asking questions." I texted back. 12:30, Italian place on Main. "What are you going to do?" I asked Hayden. He looked miserable. "What can I do? He's my brother. Our brother. He's also committing fraud. Ruby, please, just help me figure out how to fix the security systems. Maybe if we can actually deliver what we promised." "It doesn't work that way, Hayden. You can't retroactively fix fraud." My phone buzzed again. Sarah this time. "Board meeting tomorrow. Bring your department's numbers. Something's not adding up." Hayden stood up. "I should go. Em can't know we talked." "Hayden," I called after him, "be careful." At 12:30, I sat across from Savannah watching her push pasta around her plate. "I found something," she said finally, "in Emiliano's home office. Documents about offshore accounts, shell companies." "Why are you telling me this?" Savannah looked up, her eyes tired. "Because you're the only one who sees him for what he is. Hayden's too loyal, your father's too proud, but you've always known, haven't you?" "Known what?" "That he's a fraud, that he's been destroying everything your grandfather built." I studied her carefully. "What do you want from me, Savannah?" "Help me stop him, before he takes us all down with him." My phone lit up. Valerie. "Major tech blog wants to interview you about Ruby Secure. What should I tell them?" Savannah caught the name on my screen. Ruby Secure? The new security startup everyone's talking about? Her eyes widened. "That's you?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Does Emiliano know?" "Not yet." A slow smile spread across her face. "Good. Keep it that way. At least until what? Until you're strong enough to take him down." Back at the garage office that evening, I filled Valerie in. "This is perfect," she said, pacing excitedly. "We can use this. The timing couldn't be better." "It feels wrong," I admitted. "Using their weakness." "Wrong?" Valerie stopped pacing. "Like how they used your loyalty, your talent. Ruby, they're about to implode anyway. At least this way you can save the company's employees." My phone buzzed yet again. An anonymous email. "Thought you might find these interesting." Attached were documents showing Emiliano's detailed scheme to defraud investors. "Who sent this?" Valerie asked, reading over my shoulder. "I have a guess," I said, thinking of Savannah's determined face. "What are you going to do?" I stared at the documents, years of dismissal and disrespect flashing through my mind. "I'm going to that board meeting tomorrow, and I'm going to watch them squirm. And then? And then," I smiled, "I'm going to make them an offer they can't refuse." My phone lit up one final time. "Dad. Dinner on Sunday. Your mother misses you." I showed Valerie the message. Should I go? Of course, she grinned. It might be your last chance to play the dutiful daughter before everything changes. I looked at our prototype, now housed in a proper server rack, then at the damning documents on my screen. You know what the funny thing is? They always told me I was too soft for business. Well, Valerie raised her coffee cup, here's to proving them wrong. Tomorrow would change everything. The board meeting would expose the first cracks in Emiliano's facade, and I would be there to watch it crumble. The question was, when the dust settled, would anything be left of our family? The board meeting was a powder keg waiting to explode. I sat quietly watching Sarah methodically dismantle Emiliano's facade with a stack of financial reports. These numbers don't match our filed statements, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. Would anyone care to explain the discrepancy? Emiliano's confident smile flickered. There must be some mistake in the accounting. No mistake, Sarah interrupted, sliding more papers across the table. We've lost 6 major clients in the past quarter alone. Our security certifications are being questioned, and there's a significant amount of money moving through accounts I can't trace. I caught Hayden's eye across the table. He looked like he might throw up. If I may, I spoke up, opening my laptop, I have the IT department's security audit results. This isn't the time, Ruby, Emiliano snapped. Actually, Sarah said, it's exactly the time. Please continue, Ruby. I connected my laptop to the projector. Our current security infrastructure is critically outdated. We're vulnerable to at least 17 different types of cyber attacks. The certification we claimed for the government contract. We don't meet even half the requirements. The room erupted in murmurs. Emiliano's face turned red. That's enough, he slammed his hand on the table. This meeting is not adjourned, Sarah cut in. The board has questions that need answering. My phone buzzed. Valerie. Tech Insider just published their piece about Ruby Secure. It's going viral. Right on cue, one of the board members held up his tablet. Emiliano, have you seen this? A new security startup is revolutionizing the industry. Their AI-driven approach is exactly what Ruby's been proposing for years. Emiliano grabbed the tablet, his face draining of color as he read. His eyes snapped to me. You... I smiled sweetly. Yes? Before he could respond, the boardroom door burst open. Savannah strode in, holding a USB drive. Sorry I'm late, she said, not sounding sorry at all. But I think the board needs to see this. Savannah, what are you doing? Emiliano stood up. Showing them the truth, she plugged the drive into the projector. About the offshore accounts, the shell companies, all of it. The next hour was chaos. Documents flashed across the screen, proof of Emiliano's fraud, faked certifications, everything. I watched my brother's empire crumble in real time. This is a witch hunt, he sputtered. You can't prove. Actually, Sarah said, we can. The SEC will be very interested in these records. My phone buzzed again. Dad, what's happening at the office? Emiliano's not answering his phone. I ignored it, watching Hayden finally find his voice. How long? He asked Emiliano. How long have you been lying to us? I was protecting us, Emiliano shouted out, protecting our legacy. By committing fraud? I stood up. By destroying everything grandfather built? You, he pointed at me, realization dawning. Ruby Secure, that's your company, isn't it? You've been planning this. Planning what? To succeed where you failed? To build something legitimate while you played shell games with our family's reputation? The board members were whispering among themselves. Sarah cleared her throat. In light of these revelations, I moved to suspend Emiliano from his position immediately, pending a full investigation. You can't do this, Emiliano looked around wildly. Dad won't allow... Dad's retired, I reminded him, and you're about to be under federal investigation. My phone lit up. Valerie again. 3 of Graham Tech's biggest clients just reached out. They want meetings with Ruby Secure. Hayden caught my eye, nodding slightly. I knew what he was thinking. There might still be a way to save the company, but not with Emiliano at the helm. I'll have security escort you out, Sarah told Emiliano. Don't remove anything from your office. As security led him away, he stopped beside me. You planned this? All of it? My own sister? No, Emiliano. You did this. I just built a better mousetrap while you were busy burning bridges. After he left, Sarah turned to me. I assume Ruby Secure might be interested in acquiring certain assets. We might be, I smiled, once the dust settles. Later that night, I sat with Valerie in our office, watching our stock price soar following the Tech Insider article. Think your dad's seen it yet? She asked. Probably. He's left 6 voicemails I haven't listened to. Are you going to call him back? I looked at my phone at the missed calls from family members who never bothered to call before today. Eventually, I said. But first we have a company to save. Just not the one they expected. Valerie raised her glass. To the power of being underestimated. I clinked my glass against hers, thinking of Emiliano's face when he realized who had really outmaneuvered him. To karma, I replied. And to finally playing my own game. The media storm hit faster than anyone expected. By morning, every tech blog was running stories about Graham Technologies' collapse and Ruby Secure's meteoric rise. I sat in our now legitimate office space, watching the chaos unfold on multiple screens. Another interview request, Valerie announced, waving her phone. Forbes this time. Tell them, my phone buzzed. Dad again. This time I answered. Hello? Ruby. His voice sounded older than I remembered. We need to talk. Family meeting. Tonight. I'm pretty busy. This isn't a request. The line went dead. Valerie raised an eyebrow. The summons finally came? Before I could respond, Sarah walked in looking exhausted. The SEC just arrived at Graham Tech. It's a full investigation now. How bad is it? I asked. Bad enough that Emiliano might be facing jail time. She sat down heavily. Your father's beside himself. My phone lit up with a text from Hayden. Em's gone missing. Savannah's worried he might do something stupid. Perfect timing, I muttered, showing Sarah and Valerie the message. You need to go to that family meeting, Sarah said firmly. Show them you're still part of this family even if I helped expose their golden boy as a fraud. Even then. That evening, I pulled up to my parents' house, where multiple cars already lined the driveway. Hayden met me at the door. Heads up, he whispered. Dad's been drinking. The tension in the living room was thick enough to cut. Mom sat rigid in her armchair, while Dad paced by the fireplace. Savannah huddled in a corner looking worried. Well, Dad said as I entered, here's our tech genius. Happy now, Ruby? You've destroyed your brother's life. Emiliano destroyed his own life, I replied calmly. I just built a better company. A better... Dad laughed bitterly. You went behind our backs, stabbed your own family. Like you went behind my back, I interrupted, giving my brothers control of a company I helped build, ignoring every suggestion I made. You were in IT. I was in IT because you put me there, because God forbid the daughter have any real power in the family business. Savannah stepped forward. Emiliano's been calling me. He's talking crazy, saying he's going to expose everyone. Expose what? Mom asked sharply. That's what I'd like to know, I said, looking at Dad. What else is he hiding? Dad's face paled slightly. Nothing, he's just upset. My phone buzzed. A message from an anonymous number with attachments. I opened them and felt my breath catch. Dad, I said slowly, want to explain why your signature is on these offshore transfers? Dating back 5 years? The room went silent. Hayden moved to look at my phone, his face hardening. You knew, he said to Dad. You knew what Em was doing. I was protecting this family, Dad shouted. The market was changing. You needed to commit fraud, I asked. To fake certifications. To put everyone at risk. Ruby, Mom spoke up. Surely there's something you can do. Your new company. Could buy what's left of Graham Tech, I finished. Clean up this mess legally, but there would be conditions. What conditions? Dad demanded. I run everything. No interference, no backseat driving, and you both retire, completely. You can't, I can, and I will, because right now, I'm your only option. My phone buzzed again. Valerie. 3 more Graham Tech clients just signed with us. Stock's up 40%. Think carefully, I told my parents, because Emiliano's not the only one facing jail time if these documents go public. Dad slumped into a chair, suddenly looking every bit his age. You're blackmailing us. I'm offering you a way out, more than you ever offered me. Hayden cleared his throat. I'll back Ruby. She's right. It's the only way to save anything. Hayden! Dad looked betrayed. I'm done enabling this, Hayden said firmly. Ruby knows what she's doing. She always did. My phone lit up one more time. Sarah, SEC wants to interview your father tomorrow. Time's running out. I held up my phone. Tick-tock, Dad. What's it going to be? The silence stretched for what felt like hours. Finally, Mom stood up. Accept her offer, Robert, she said quietly, before we lose everything. Dad looked at me, really looked at me, maybe for the first time in years. When did you get so hard? When you taught me that being soft meant being ignored. I headed for the door. You have until morning to decide. After that, I can't help you. As I left, I heard Mom start to cry. Part of me wanted to go back to comfort her, but that part was getting smaller every day. In my car, I texted Valerie, get the paperwork ready. Tomorrow we either save Graham Tech or watch it burn. Her response was immediate. Either way, you win. I wasn't so sure about that anymore, but it was too late to stop now. Morning brought a flurry of messages. The first was from Emiliano. You think you've won? Watch the news at 9. The second was from Dad. We'll take the deal. The third was from Sarah. Emergency meeting now. Emiliano's threatening to go public. I rushed to Graham Tech's offices where chaos reigned, reporters camped outside the entrance, and security struggled to maintain order. Sarah met me at a side door. He's lost his mind, she said, hurrying me through back corridors. He's scheduled a press conference in 30 minutes. The boardroom was packed. Dad sat at the head of the table looking defeated. Mum wasn't there. Hayden paced by the windows while Savannah typed frantically on her phone. He's not answering my calls, Savannah said, but he sent me this. She held up her phone, showing a draft of Emiliano's prepared statement, a document that would implicate everyone, including himself. He's going to destroy himself just to take us all down, Hayden muttered. My phone buzzed. Valerie, our legal team's ready. Say the word. Where is he? I asked. Plaza Hotel, Savannah replied. He's booked their conference room. I checked my watch. 20 minutes. Dad, I said, I need your signature. Now. He looked up, confused. What? I pulled out a folder. Transfer of ownership. Complete control of Graham Tech to Ruby Secure, effective immediately. Now, but sign it, or in 20 minutes, everything goes public. Your choice. His hand shook as he took the pen. As he signed, my phone lit up with another message from Emiliano. Last chance, little sister. Back off or everyone burns. I forwarded it to Valerie. Execute Plan B. What are you doing? Hayden asked. Saving what I can. I turned to Sarah. Get the SEC on the phone. Tell them we're self-reporting and cooperating fully. Ruby, Dad protested. It's done, I cut him off. I own the company now, and I'm doing this right. My phone rang. Emiliano. I put it on speaker. Hello, brother. Called to gloat? His voice was slurred. Called to tell you it's over. I just bought the company. The SEC is already involved. Your press conference will only hurt you now. You think I care? You think I think you're drunk and angry, I interrupted. And I think you should know that Savannah's pregnant. The silence was deafening. Savannah shot me a startled look, then slowly nodded. What? Emiliano's voice cracked. 8 weeks, Savannah said quietly. I was waiting for the right time to tell you. So, here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to cancel that press conference. You're going to check yourself into rehab. And when you get out, if you've cooperated with the investigation, there might be a future for your child that doesn't involve visiting their father in prison. More silence. Then, how do I know you'll keep your word? Because unlike you, I actually care about this family's legacy. The line went dead. 5 minutes later, Savannah's phone buzzed. "He's cancelling the press conference," she said, relief evident in her voice. Dad stood up shakily. "What happens now?" "Now?" I looked around the room. "Now I clean up your mess. But first," I turned to Sarah. "Call security, clear out Emiliano's office and Dad's too." "Ruby," Dad started. "Go home," I said firmly. "Both of you, spend time with Mom. Let me handle this." As they left, Hayden approached me. "What about me?" "That depends. Are you ready to actually work for a living?" He nodded. "I want to make this right." "Good, because I need someone who knows operations and you're the only one I still trust." My phone buzzed one last time. "Valerie. Press release is ready. Want to announce the merger?" I looked around the boardroom at the family portraits on the walls, at the legacy I'd just inherited. "Send it," I texted back, then to Hayden. "Ready to build something real this time?" He smiled slightly. "Lead the way, little sister." Later that evening, I sat in what used to be Emiliano's office, my office now, watching the sun set over the city. My phone lit up with a message from Mom. "I'm proud of you." I should have said that years ago. I stared at those words for a long time, feeling the weight of everything that had changed. The company was mine now, but at what cost? And could anything ever be the same again? Valerie appeared in the doorway. "Coming. The team's waiting to celebrate." I stood up, taking one last look at the family photo on the wall. "Yeah," I said. "Let's go build something worth celebrating." 3 months after the takeover, I stood in front of the merged company's board, presenting our first quarterly results. The room was different now, younger, more diverse, with Valerie and Hayden flanking me instead of my father's old guard. "Ruby Secure's integration with Graham Tech has exceeded projections." I clicked through the slides. "Revenue is up 60% from last quarter. Client retention has stabilized at 95%. "And the government contracts?" one board member asked. "Fully compliant now," Hayden answered. "We've passed every security audit with flying colours." My phone buzzed. Savannah. "M's completing his programme. Doctors say he's doing well." "What about the SEC investigation?" another board member pressed. "Resolved," I replied. "Full cooperation and transparency earned us minimal fines. The criminal charges are confined to the previous management." The meeting continued smoothly until Sarah, who'd stayed on as advisor, raised her hand. "There's one more item. Your father's requesting a meeting." The room went quiet. I kept my voice steady. "For what purpose?" "He says he has information about additional offshore accounts we haven't found yet." My phone lit up again. Mom this time. "Please talk to your father. He's trying." "Schedule it," I told Sarah. "But in the office, not at home." After the board dispersed, Valerie lingered. "You sure about meeting him?" "No choice. We need to find every skeleton before they find us." The next morning, Dad sat across from me in my office, looking smaller than I remembered. "The decorations are different," he noted, glancing around. "The company's different," I replied. "The accounts." He pulled out a notebook. "There are 3 more. Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and—" "Why now?" I interrupted. "Why tell me this after 3 months?" He set the notebook down. "Because I'm dying, Ruby." The words hit like a physical blow. "What?" "Cancer. Stage 4. Maybe 6 months left." My phone buzzed. "Hayden, Dad told you?" "How long have you known?" I asked Dad. "Found out last week. Your mother's taking it hard." I stood up, walking to the window. "The accounts?" "Ruby, the accounts, Dad. That's why you're here." He sighed, opening the notebook again. For the next hour, we worked through the details, my team documenting everything. When we finished, he lingered by the door. "The company's thriving under you," he said quietly. "I was wrong. About everything." "Yes, you were." "Your mother wants you to come to dinner. Sunday." My phone lit up, Valerie. "Major tech conference wants you as keynote speaker. Theme: Women revolutionizing security." "I'll think about it," I told Dad. After he left, Hayden came in. "You okay?" "Are you?" You knew about Dad? Found out yesterday, Mom called. I sank into my chair. 6 months. Yeah. Hayden sat across from me. What do you want to do? About the company? Nothing changes. We keep building. About Dad. My phone buzzed again. Emiliano this time. Heard about Dad. Can we talk? I showed Hayden the message. He nodded slowly. Maybe it's time. For what? To decide what kind of legacy we really want to leave. Later that day, I called a meeting with Valerie, Hayden, and Sarah. I need your honest opinions, I said. Can we bring Emiliano back? Not as an executive, but maybe in sales or... No, Valerie said immediately. Hear me out, I continued. Dad's dying. The company's stable. Maybe it's time to... To what? Sarah interrupted. Return to the old ways? Ruby, you've built something remarkable here. Don't risk it out of guilt. My phone lit up. A message from the rehab facility. Mr. Emiliano has shown exceptional progress. Family support would be beneficial at this stage. Hayden read the message over my shoulder. What if we start small? Let him prove himself. Under strict supervision, Valerie added reluctantly, and with no access to finances. I looked around at my team, my real family for the past year. Vote on it. They nodded. One by one, they wrote their votes on paper. When I counted them, the result was unanimous. Conditional second chance. I texted Emiliano, Sunday dinner at Mom's. We'll talk then. His response was immediate. Thank you, little sister. Looking out over the city skyline, I thought about legacy, not just the company's, but our families. Maybe there was still time to build something worth leaving behind. My phone buzzed one final time. Mom. Family dinner on Sunday. All of you. No business talk, just family. For the first time in months, I smiled at a family message. I'll be there, I texted back. Sometimes the hardest part of winning isn't the victory itself. It's deciding what to do with it. Sunday dinner felt surreal. Mom had set the table with the good china. Like nothing had changed, but everything had. Emiliano sat across from me, sober and subdued, while Savannah's small baby bump showed under her dress. Hayden kept glancing between us nervously, as if expecting an explosion. The pot roast is excellent, Valerie said, breaking the silence. I'd insisted on bringing her. I needed at least one ally here. Thank you, dear, Mom smiled. Ruby's grandmother's recipe. Dad cleared his throat. I understand the company won Innovation of the Year. We did, I nodded. Hayden's team deserves most of the credit. Our team, Hayden corrected. Ruby's leadership made it possible. Emiliano set down his fork. I saw the presentation online, the AI security protocol. It's brilliant. It's what I tried to tell you 3 years ago, I couldn't help saying. I know. He met my eyes. I should have listened. My phone buzzed. Sarah. Major acquisition opportunity just came up. Need your decision by morning. I ignored it. This dinner was more important. I've been thinking, Emiliano continued, about what you said about legacy. Savannah warned softly. No, let me finish. He took a deep breath. I spent years trying to be what Dad wanted, the strong son, the leader. I never stopped to think about what was best for the company, for our family. Dad started to speak, but Mom touched his arm, silencing him. Ruby, Emiliano said, you were right. About everything. And I'm sorry. The words hung in the air. My phone buzzed again. Valerie had texted under the table. You okay? I set my napkin down. Sorry isn't enough. I know. But, I continued, actions might be. Everyone looked at me. I pulled out a folder I'd brought, sliding it across the table to Emiliano. What's this? He asked. A job offer, entry level, sales department. You'll report to Hayden. Ruby, Dad protested but stopped when Mom squeezed his hand. Why? Emiliano asked. Because you're good with people when you're not trying to prove something, because your child deserves to know their father, and because... I glanced at Dad. Life's too short for permanent exile. Savannah started crying softly. Hayden reached over and grabbed her hand. There are conditions, I continued. Regular drug tests, No access to company finances. One mistake and you're out. Emiliano nodded slowly. When do I start? Monday, if you're ready. I am. He looked around the table. I really am. My phone lit up again, this time with a photo from Sarah. The company's name on the NASDAQ board, our stock price hitting a new high. Look, I showed everyone the photo. This is us now, all of us. If we want it to be. Dad stood up suddenly, wobbling slightly. Mom rushed to steady him. I need to say something, he announced. Ruby. When I built this company, I thought I knew what strength looked like. I was wrong. You're stronger than I ever was. Dad, let me finish. I'm proud of you. Not just of what you built, but of who you are, even when that means standing against me. Mom was crying now too. I felt Valerie squeeze my hand under the table. The company's in better hands now, Dad continued. All I ask is, let me help while I can. Even just to share stories about your grandfather, about how it all started. I stood up, walking around the table to him. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Then I hugged him, feeling his frailty, knowing our time was limited. Sunday dinners, I said. Every week, no business talk, just family. Just family, he agreed. My phone buzzed one last time, a message from Sarah that made me smile. I showed it to everyone. Forbes just named you one of the 40 under 40. Headline reads, Ruby Graham, redefining family business for the digital age. To Ruby, Hayden raised his glass. Everyone followed suit. No, I said, to family, the one we choose to be. Later that night, as Valerie and I left, she asked, was it worth it? All of it? I looked back at the house, at my family visible through the window, broken but healing, changed but together. Ask me again in 6 months, I said. But right now, yeah, it was worth it. What's next? I smiled, thinking of the acquisition opportunity waiting in my inbox, of Emiliano's first day tomorrow, of Dad's stories still untold. Next, we build something that lasts, something worthy of the name they never thought I could carry. Together, she asked. Together, I agreed, all of us.
My name is Catherine, and this is the story of how my life took an unexpected turn. Fresh out of college with a law degree, I landed a job as a lawyer's assistant at a large trading company. The company's offices were a maze of cubicles and departments. On my third day, while trying to find the copy room, I quite literally bumped into Mark from the purchasing department. Whoa there, he laughed, steadying me. You must be new. I'm Mark. Catherine, I replied, feeling my cheeks flush. I'm the new lawyer's assistant. And yes, I'm a bit lost. Mark's eyes twinkled. Well, Catherine, consider me your personal GPS. Where are you headed? From that moment, Mark and I became friends. We'd chat during lunch breaks, and he'd always find an excuse to drop by my department. As the weeks passed, our friendship deepened into something more. One Friday evening, as we were leaving work, Mark turned to me. Hey, Catherine, want to grab dinner? There's this great Italian place around the corner. I hesitated for a moment, then smiled. I'd love to. That dinner marked the beginning of our romantic relationship. We dated for a year, our bond growing stronger with each passing day. Mark was everything I'd ever wanted in a partner, kind, funny, and supportive. On our first anniversary, Mark proposed. We were married 6 months later in a small ceremony with our closest friends and family. Mark's mother, Linda, attended but seemed less than thrilled. She'd always been a bit cold towards me, and I overheard her muttering to a relative during the reception. He could have done better, she said, not realizing I was within earshot. There are so many successful, rich girls out there. But no, he had to choose her. Her words stung, but I tried not to let them dampen my happiness. Mark loved me, and that was all that mattered. After the wedding, we decided to buy an apartment. I had inherited a substantial sum from my grandmother, so Mark and I were able to split the cost 50-50. It was a cozy 2-bedroom place in a nice neighborhood, perfect for starting our life together. A year into our marriage, life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Mark and I were both doing well at work, and our weekends were filled with lazy mornings and exploring the city. Everything seemed perfect, until the day I woke up feeling off. At first, I brushed it off as a simple stomach bug. But as days passed and the nausea persisted, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered a possibility I hadn't considered. Could I be pregnant? One morning, I decided to find out for sure. I bought a pregnancy test on my way to work and snuck into the office bathroom during my lunch break. Those 2 minutes of waiting were the longest of my life. When I finally looked at the stick, my heart skipped a beat. 2 pink lines. That evening, I decided to surprise Mark with the news. I picked up his favorite takeout and set the table with candles. When he walked in, his eyebrows shot up. "What's the occasion?" he asked, hanging up his coat. I took a deep breath. "Mark, I have something to tell you. I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was deafening. Mark's face went through a series of emotions: surprise, confusion, and then, disappointment. "Are you sure?" he finally asked, his voice strained. I nodded, my earlier excitement fading. "I took a test today. It's positive." Mark sank into a chair, running a hand through his hair. "Catherine, don't you think it's too soon? We've only been married a year. We haven't even had time to enjoy each other yet. Maybe we should consider our options?" I felt like I'd been doused in ice water. "Options? Are you suggesting an abortion?" Mark shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "It's just something to think about. We're both building our careers. A baby would change everything." I stood up, my hands shaking. "I can't believe what I'm hearing. This is our child, Mark. I'm keeping it." The next few days were tense. Mark and I danced around each other, the elephant in the room growing larger by the minute. I decided to see a doctor, hoping for some good news to change Mark's mind. The visit didn't go as I'd hoped. The doctor, a kind-faced woman named Dr. Patel, looked at me with concern after the examination. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm afraid your pregnancy is high risk," she said gently. "You'll need to be very careful. Less stress, more rest, and plenty of relaxation." I felt my world tilting. "What does that mean for the baby?" Dr. Patel squeezed my hand. "It means we'll need to monitor you closely. There's a risk of miscarriage, but with proper care, we can minimize that risk." I left the clinic in a daze. How was I supposed to have less stress when my own husband didn't want our baby? When I got home, I found Mark watching TV. "How did it go?" he asked, not looking away from the screen. I took a deep breath. "The pregnancy is high risk. I need to reduce stress and rest more. I'm going to ask if I can work remotely." Mark's jaw clenched. "Catherine, I really think we need to reconsider this. It's not too late to—" "Stop," I cut him off. "I've made my decision, Mark. I'm having this baby, with or without your support." The next morning, I approached my boss, Mr. Jameson, with trepidation. I explained my situation and requested to work remotely. To my relief, he was understanding and agreed immediately. "Your health and your baby's health come first, Catherine," he said kindly. "We'll set you up with everything you need to work from home." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, but it was short-lived. When I told Mark about the arrangement, his reaction was less than enthusiastic. "Great," he muttered. "So you'll be home all day, doing what exactly?" I stared at him, incredulous. "Working, Mark. And taking care of myself and our baby." He scoffed and walked away, leaving me feeling more alone than ever. As the weeks passed, I threw myself into my work and preparing for the baby. I read every pregnancy book I could find, started eating healthier, and even took up prenatal yoga. Meanwhile, Mark grew more distant. He started staying late at work, claiming he had to pick up my slack. On weekends, he'd suddenly have business trips that he'd never mentioned before. I tried to talk to him about it, but he'd brush me off. One evening, as I was setting the table for dinner, the doorbell rang. It was Mark's mother, Linda. "I thought I'd drop by and see how you're doing," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. I invited her in, trying to ignore the way her gaze critically swept over my growing belly. "Mark tells me you're working from home now," she said, settling onto our couch. I nodded. "Yes, the doctor advised it for the baby's health. You know, Catherine, a child isn't always the blessing people make it out to be. Especially when it comes at the wrong time." I felt my hackles rise. "There's never a perfect time for a baby, Linda. We'll manage." She leaned forward, her voice lowering. "Are you sure about that? Mark is young, ambitious. He needs a partner who can support his career, not hold him back. Don't make him regret his choice." A few days later, as Mark was getting ready for work, I caught a whiff of something unfamiliar. A perfume, floral and sweet, that definitely wasn't mine. I froze, my mind racing. "New cologne?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Mark looked startled for a moment before shrugging. "Oh, yeah, got it as a sample. Like it?" I forced a smile. "It's nice." But as he left for work, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The perfume wasn't cologne, and it certainly wasn't a sample. It was expensive women's perfume, and it clung to my husband's shirt like a silent accusation. The next morning, after Mark left for work, I picked up my phone with shaking hands. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for, my cousin, Jack. He worked for a detective agency, and if anyone could help me uncover the truth, it was him. "Hey, Kath," Jack answered cheerfully. "What's up?" I took a deep breath. "Jack, I need your help. It's about Mark." I explained everything, the late nights, the business trips, the perfume. My voice broke as I finished. "I think he's cheating on me, Jack. I need to know for sure." Jack's voice was gentle when he replied. "I'll look into it, Kath. Give me a few weeks, okay?" Meanwhile, I threw myself into my work and preparing for the baby. I ordered a crib, started looking at paint swatches for the nursery, anything to keep my mind occupied. But the gnawing fear in my gut wouldn't go away. Finally, after 3 agonizing weeks, Jack called. "Can you meet me at the cafe on 5th Street?" he asked, his voice serious. An hour later, I sat across from Jack in a quiet corner of the cafe. He slid a manila envelope across the table. "I'm sorry, Catherine," he said softly. "But you were right." With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside were photos, dozens of them. Mark entering hotels, Mark at restaurants, Mark walking in the park. And in every single one, he was with the same woman, young, blonde, beautiful. "Her name is Melissa," Jack explained. "She's a new employee in Mark's department. They'd been seeing each other for at least a month, maybe longer." I stared at the photos, feeling numb. How could he do this? Jack reached out and squeezed my hand. "There's more. Mark told you he's on a business trip this weekend, right?" I nodded, dreading what was coming next. "He lied," Jack said. "He's with her right now. At the Westview Hotel, room 412. The world seemed to tilt around me. The taxi ride home was a blur. When I finally stumbled through my front door, clutching the envelope of damning photos, I was surprised to find Linda, my mother-in-law, in the living room. "Oh, Catherine," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I thought I'd come clean the house while Mark's on his business trip. Lord knows you don't do much around here these days." Her words, on top of everything else, were the last straw. "He's not on a business trip," I snapped. "He's with his mistress right now." Linda's eyes widened for a moment before narrowing. "Well, if he is, and I'm not saying he is, can you blame him? Look at you. You're always sick, you've let yourself go, and you never pay attention to him anymore. This whole pregnancy was a mistake. No one wants this baby except you. Something inside me snapped. Get out, I hissed. Get out of my house right now. Linda looked shocked for a moment, then sneered. Gladly. Don't come crying to me when Mark leaves you. As the front door slammed behind Linda, I sat on the floor, my mind reeling from her cruel words. But as the initial shock wore off, a new emotion took its place, determination. I couldn't just sit here while my husband betrayed me. With shaking hands, I pulled myself up and grabbed my car keys. I knew where Mark was, and I was going to confront him. The drive to the Westview Hotel was a blur, my thoughts a chaotic mix of anger, hurt, and disbelief. Before I knew it, I was standing in front of room 412. I could hear laughter from inside, Mark's deep chuckle, and a woman's high-pitched giggle. My stomach churned, but I steeled myself and knocked on the door. Must be room service, a woman's voice called out cheerfully. We'd been waiting for that champagne. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The door swung open, and there stood Mark, his smile freezing as he saw me. Catherine, he stammered, clearly caught off guard. What are you doing here? I pushed past him into the room, my eyes immediately landing on the blonde woman hastily wrapping herself in a sheet. Melissa, I presumed. Mark, I started, my voice trembling. How could you? But to my shock, instead of apologizing or trying to explain, Mark's face hardened. How could I? How could you, Catherine? You haven't satisfied me in months. All you care about is that baby. His words hit me like a physical blow. I staggered back, my vision blurring. Mark continued, his voice dripping with disgust. You don't take care of yourself anymore. Look at Melissa, he waved towards his mistress. That's how a woman should look. That's how you used to be. Melissa chose that moment to speak up, her voice sickeningly sweet. You should be grateful to us, you know. We're being considerate, waiting for you to have the baby before Mark leaves you. We're the honest ones here. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Suddenly, a sharp pain lanced through my abdomen, far worse than anything I'd felt before. My vision darkened around the edges, and I felt myself losing balance. Mark, I gasped, reaching out to him as I fell. Please, call an ambulance. But Mark and Melissa were already moving, gathering their things. They roughly grabbed my arms and dragged me out into the hallway. You brought this on yourself, Mark said coldly, stepping over me as I lay on the floor. The last thing I saw before I lost consciousness was their retreating figures, leaving me alone in my hour of need. I came to with a start, the concerned face of a hotel maid hovering over me. My whole body ached, and the pain in my abdomen was excruciating. Ma'am, are you okay? I've called an ambulance, the maid said, her voice laced with worry. I tried to speak, but could only manage a weak groan. The next few hours passed in a blur of sirens, bright lights, and urgent voices. I drifted in and out of consciousness, always aware of the gnawing fear for my baby. When I finally fully regained consciousness, I was in a hospital bed. A doctor stood at my bedside, her face grave. Mrs. Thompson, she said gently. I'm so sorry. We did everything we could, but you've lost the baby. Her words hit me like a physical blow. I closed my eyes, hot tears streaming down my face. As the reality of what had happened sank in, my grief turned to anger. Mark, his mother, that woman Melissa, they were all responsible for this. They had killed my baby with their cruelty and selfishness. After being discharged, I went straight to our apartment. With mechanical efficiency, I packed all of Mark's belongings into boxes. Then, I drove to Linda's house. I dumped the boxes unceremoniously in her driveway, then marched up to her front door. Linda opened it, her face a mask of false concern. Catherine, dear. I heard what happened. Such a shame, she said, not sounding sorry at all. I pushed past her into the house. Save it, Linda. I know you don't care. She dropped the act immediately. Well, what did you expect? It's for the best, really. Now you and Mark can get a divorce, and you can move out of that apartment." I stared at her, incredulous. "Move out? That apartment is half mine." Linda waved her hand dismissively. "Details. Mark has excellent lawyers, you know. They'll make sure he gets everything. You're not fit to be his wife, Catherine. You're too simple for him. It's best if you just leave quietly. Don't make a fuss." I felt my fists clench at my sides. "I will not leave quietly," I hissed. "I'm going to fight. For the apartment, for everything. Your son and his mistress killed my baby, and I won't let them get away with it." Linda's face paled slightly, but she quickly recovered. "Don't be dramatic, Catherine. These things happen. It's nobody's fault." As I turned to leave, a thought struck me. I faced Linda one last time. "Tell me something, Linda. How would you feel if you lost your child? If someone's cruelty and selfishness robbed you of your baby?" For the first time, Linda looked genuinely shaken. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, at a loss for words. I nodded, a grim satisfaction settling over me. That's what I thought. With a newfound determination, I reached out to my old college friend, Alex, who had become a successful divorce lawyer. When I explained my situation, he didn't hesitate. "I've got your back, Catherine," Alex assured me. "We'll make sure you get what you deserve." The court proceedings were grueling. Mark and Melissa put on a united front, denying their affair and painting me as a mentally unstable woman inventing stories after losing my baby. "Your Honor," Mark's lawyer argued, "Mrs. Thompson is clearly suffering from delusions brought on by her tragic loss. There is no affair, only a grieving woman's imagination." But Alex was prepared. With a nod from the judge, he presented the evidence we had gathered. "I'd like to submit these photographs into evidence," Alex announced, passing them to the judge. The courtroom buzzed as Mark and Melissa's faces paled. Then came the coup de grace. "Furthermore, Your Honor, we have video evidence from the Westview Hotel." The footage played, showing Mark and Melissa dragging my unconscious body into the hallway, laughing as they abandoned me. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Finally, the hotel maid testified, describing how she found me unconscious and called for help. By the time she finished, there wasn't a sympathetic face for Mark or Melissa in the room. The judge's verdict was swift and decisive. "In light of the evidence presented, I rule in favor of Mrs. Thompson. Mr. Thompson will pay financial compensation for emotional distress, and all marital assets will be divided equally." As we left the courthouse, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't a complete victory, nothing could bring back my baby, but it was a start. In the following weeks, I threw myself into rebuilding my life. I bought a small apartment, started seeing a therapist, and slowly began to heal. Just as I was finding my footing, my phone rang with an unexpected caller, Linda. "Catherine," her voice was uncharacteristically hesitant. "Can we meet? Please?" Every instinct told me to refuse, but curiosity won out. "Fine. The cafe on 5th Street, tomorrow at 2. When I arrived at the cafe, I almost didn't recognize Linda. Gone was the haughty, well-put-together woman. In her place sat someone who looked broken. "Catherine," she began, her voice trembling. "I was wrong. About everything." She went on to explain how Melissa had manipulated Mark, turning him against his own mother. They were planning to sell Linda's house, leaving her with nothing. "I've heard rumors," Linda continued, wiping away tears. "They're planning something at the company. Something illegal. Catherine, I know I have no right to ask, but you're the only one who can stop them." I sat back, stunned. Part of me wanted to walk away, to let them destroy each other. But as Linda mentioned the company, my company, I felt a responsibility I couldn't ignore. With my legal background, diving into the company's documents wasn't as daunting as it might have been for others. I spent days poring over contracts, purchase orders, and financial reports, slowly piecing together a disturbing picture. Mark's department was consistently overpaying for goods, far above market rates. At first, I thought it might be incompetence, but as I dug deeper, a pattern emerged. The inflated prices always benefited the same handful of suppliers, and the discrepancies had started around the time Melissa joined the company. But the worst was yet to come. I uncovered plans for an upcoming major contract, one that could make or break the company's fiscal year. Mark was set to purchase substandard goods at premium prices, a move that would cripple the company's profits and reputation. With a file full of evidence, I marched into the CEO's office. Mr. Jameson looked up, surprised to see me. "Catherine? What's this about?" "Sir," I said, my voice steady, "I've uncovered something you need to see immediately." For the next hour, I laid out everything I'd found. Mr. Jameson's face grew grimmer with each passing minute. This is unbelievable," he finally said. "Catherine, I can't thank you enough for bringing this to our attention. We'll launch a full investigation immediately." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I found myself at the center of an internal investigation, providing testimony and evidence. Mark and Melissa were suspended pending the outcome. When the dust settled, the evidence was irrefutable. The company filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against Mark and Melissa, and criminal charges soon followed. I watched from the courtroom as they were both convicted, knowing they'd never hold positions of power again. In the aftermath, Mr. Jameson called me into his office again. This time, his face was beaming. "Catherine, your work on this case was exemplary. We'd like to offer you a promotion to senior lawyer, along with this award for exceptional service to the company." I left his office with a new title and a plaque, feeling a mix of pride and bittersweet vindication. Weeks later, my phone rang. It was Linda. "Catherine," she said, her voice choked with emotion. I heard what you did. You saved the company. You saved my house. I was so wrong about you. Can you ever forgive me?" "Linda," I replied softly, "I forgive you. But I think it's best if we both move on with our lives separately." "I understand," she said. "Thank you, Catherine. For everything." As I hung up the phone, I felt a chapter of my life truly closing. The pain would always be there, a dull ache for the child I'd lost and the life I'd thought I'd have. But I'd also discovered a strength in myself I never knew existed. I'm Camille, and this is the story of how my life took an unexpected turn. It all started when I was just a bright-eyed college student, full of dreams and ambitions. I was studying to become a financial analyst, and that's where I met him, Mark. Mark was everything I thought I wanted in a partner. Smart, charming, and as ambitious as I was. We hit it off immediately, spending hours talking about our future plans and how we'd conquer the world together. It wasn't long before we decided to get married, right there in college. And so, our journey began. Mark set his sights on becoming a university professor, while I aimed for a position in a large investment company. We were young, in love, and ready to take on the world. After graduation, things started falling into place. Mark landed a teaching position at the university, and I secured a job as a financial analyst at a reputable investment firm. We were ecstatic, feeling like we were on the right path to achieving our dreams. In those early days, Mark's career took off like a rocket. He quickly became one of the most popular young professors at the university. Students loved his engaging teaching style, and his colleagues respected his intellect. I couldn't have been prouder. Meanwhile, I was quietly making progress in my own career. I threw myself into my work, analyzing financial data, creating reports, and slowly but surely climbing the corporate ladder. It wasn't as flashy as Mark's rising star, but I was content. As time went on, Mark became more involved in the university's social life. He was often invited to give interviews, attend faculty events, and spend extra time with his students. This meant he was frequently home late, but I understood. After all, we had agreed that our careers would come first. "Sorry I'm late again, Camille," he'd say, rushing through the door at 9 p.m. The students had so many questions after the lecture, and then the dean wanted to chat. I'd smile and say, "Don't worry about it. I'm just glad you're making such an impact." One evening, as we sat down for a rare dinner together, Mark looked at me curiously. "How's your job going, by the way? Still crunching numbers?" I hesitated for a moment. I had recently been promoted to senior analyst, but I hadn't mentioned it to Mark. Somehow, it felt wrong to steal his thunder. "Oh, same old," I replied with a shrug. "How about you? Any exciting news?" And just like that, the conversation shifted back to his world, his achievements, his plans. I listened and nodded, playing the role of the supportive wife perfectly. But deep down, a small voice whispered that something wasn't quite right. As the years rolled by, my career at the investment company began to take off. It wasn't an easy journey. Late nights, endless spreadsheets, and high-pressure meetings became my norm. But I loved every minute of it. One evening, I came home buzzing with excitement. "Mark, you won't believe it. I've been promoted to head of finance." Mark looked up from his laptop, his expression unreadable. "That's nice, honey. More responsibility, I suppose?" I felt my smile falter. "Well, yes. And a significant pay raise too." He nodded absently. "That's good. Hey, did I tell you about the paper I'm publishing next month?" And just like that, the conversation shifted back to his world. I pushed down my disappointment and listened attentively as he went on about his latest academic achievements. As time went on, I noticed a shift in our dynamic. My income had begun to surpass Mark's, and it seemed to bother him more than I expected. One night, after a few drinks, he brought it up. "Camille, I've been thinking. I need to find ways to earn more," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "It's not right that you're making more than me." I was taken aback. "Mark, what are you talking about? It's our money, our family budget. It doesn't matter who earns what." He scoffed. "Easy for you to say. You're not the one feeling inadequate." His words stung. I tried to reassure him, to make him understand that his worth wasn't tied to his paycheck, but it felt like talking to a brick wall. Meanwhile, our financial situation was improving rapidly. We bought a beautiful house, 2 cars, and even invested in some apartments. Our bank accounts were growing, and from the outside, we looked like the perfect power couple. But behind closed doors, things were far from perfect. Mark's jealousy of my achievements grew, casting a shadow over our relationship. He began to drink more, often coming home late smelling of alcohol. One night, he stumbled in, his eyes bloodshot. "Guess what, Camille? They picked some middle-aged woman for the dean position instead of me. That woman must be sleeping with the rector. It's the only explanation." I was shocked by his assumption. "Mark, that's a terrible thing to say. Maybe she was just more qualified?" He turned on me, his eyes flashing with anger. "What, you think I'm dumber than her? Is that it?" "Of course not," I backpedaled. "You're the smartest person I know." He laughed bitterly. "Right. Well, I'm smart enough to know how women get ahead in this world." Through the bedroom. The implication hung heavy in the air. I felt my cheeks burn with anger and hurt. "Is that what you think about me too?" But Mark had already turned away, stumbling towards the spare bedroom. "I'm sleeping here tonight," he mumbled, slamming the door behind him. I stood there in the hallway, feeling like I'd been slapped. Was this really the man I had married? The brilliant, ambitious partner I thought I knew? As weeks turned into months, Mark's behavior continued to worsen. His drinking became more frequent, and his bitterness about his career seemed to consume him. I tried everything I could think of to help him. "Mark, what about some personal development courses?" I asked one evening, watching him pour his 3rd glass of whiskey. "They might give you new perspectives, help you advance your career." His eyes flashed with anger. "Why don't you mind your own damn business? I don't need your charity or your condescension." I recoiled, hurt by his harsh words. I'm just trying to help, Mark. I hate seeing you like this. Then stop looking, he spat, storming out of the room. Meanwhile, my own career continued to flourish. I was developing financial models for new projects, making projections about investment returns, and my voice was becoming increasingly influential in major company decisions. But every success felt tainted by the knowledge of how it would affect Mark. One night, I had to stay late for an important meeting. I texted Mark to let him know, but in the rush of finalizing presentations and crunching last-minute numbers, I forgot to check if he'd responded. When I finally got home, well past midnight, I found Mark waiting in the living room. The moment I walked in, I knew something was wrong. The air was thick with tension, and the smell of alcohol hit me like a wall. "Where the hell have you been?" he demanded, his words slightly slurred. "I'm so sorry, Mark. The meeting ran late, and then we had to revise some figures, and..." He cut me off with a bitter laugh. "Oh, I'm sure you were very busy. Staying late with your bosses, were you? All your promotions, your success, you're sleeping with them, aren't you?" The accusation hit me like a physical blow. "How dare you?" I whispered, tears springing to my eyes. "How can you think so little of me?" "How else do you explain it?" he shouted. "Women like you, you're all the same. Using your bodies to get ahead while hardworking men like me get left behind." I couldn't bear to hear any more. "We'll talk about this in the morning when you're sober," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But Mark wasn't finished. He launched into a tirade, blaming me for everything: his stalled career, our childless state, his unfulfilled dreams. Every word was like a knife, cutting deep into the heart of our relationship. "Maybe we should see a marriage counselor," I suggested weakly, when he finally paused for breath. He laughed humorlessly. "A counselor won't fix this, Camille. I need to be alone. I can't stand the sight of you right now." With that, he grabbed his keys and stormed out, leaving me alone in the echoing silence of our home. I didn't sleep that night. I called Mark repeatedly, but he never picked up. When morning came, I dragged myself to work, feeling like a shell of myself. I was distracted all day, my mind replaying Mark's cruel words over and over again. Then, in an ironic twist of fate, my boss called me into his office. "Camille," he said, smiling broadly, "I have some exciting news. We want you to represent the company at the International Investment Forum in Paris next month. It's a huge opportunity." I arrived home that evening with a mix of anticipation and dread. The house was quiet as I entered, and for a moment, I wondered if Mark was even home. Then I heard the clink of a glass from the living room. Taking a deep breath, I stepped in. Mark was there, nursing what looked like his usual whiskey. "Mark," I began cautiously, "something happened at work today. I've been invited to represent our company at the International Investment Forum in Paris next month." I watched his face carefully, hoping to see a hint of pride or happiness for me. Instead, his expression hardened. "Paris? And you're going, I suppose?" "Well, yes. It's a huge opportunity for my career, for my future. For our future." He stood up abruptly. "No, this is about you choosing your job over your marriage. Again." "That's not fair," I protested. "You've never had a problem focusing on your career. Why is it different when it's mine?" "Because you're my wife," he shouted. "Your place is here, with me, not halfway across the world schmoozing with businessmen." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "My place? Are you serious right now?" Mark's face was red with anger. "Dead serious. You need to make a choice, Camille. Right now. It's either me or this trip. You can't have both." I stared at him, shocked by the ultimatum. This man, who I'd supported through every career move, every late night at the university, was now asking me to give up a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And for what? To soothe his bruised ego? In that moment, looking at the stranger my husband had become, I made my decision. "I'm going to Paris, Mark. His face contorted with rage. Without a word, he stormed out of the room. A few minutes later, he returned, slapping a stack of papers on the coffee table. "What's this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Divorce papers," he spat. "Since your career is clearly more important to you than our marriage, let's just end this charade." I picked up the papers with trembling hands. Part of me wanted to tear them up, to beg him to reconsider. But a stronger part, a part that had been silenced for too long, knew this was the right thing to do. "Fine," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'll take these with me to Paris. We can discuss it when I get back." With the divorce papers tucked safely in my briefcase and a heart heavy with conflicting emotions, I left for Paris the next morning. Mark didn't even bother to say goodbye. The International Investment Forum was everything I had hoped for and more. I found myself surrounded by brilliant minds from all over the world, discussing cutting-edge financial strategies and global economic trends. It was exhilarating. On the third day of the conference, I met Jacques, a charming French investor who took an interest in my work. "Your analysis of emerging markets is fascinating, Camille," he said over coffee. "Have you considered publishing your findings?" I laughed, somewhat embarrassed. "Oh, I don't know. I'm just doing my job." Jacques shook his head. Non, this is more than just a job. You have a gift, my dear. You shouldn't hide it." His words struck a chord in me. How long had I been downplaying my achievements, making myself smaller to fit into the role of the supportive wife? As the days passed, I found myself opening up, sharing ideas more freely, and even leading a few impromptu discussions. People listened to me, valued my opinions. It was intoxicating. As the forum drew to a close, I was approached by Sophia, the CEO of a prestigious international firm. "Camille," she said, her eyes twinkling with interest, "I've been watching your work this week. How would you feel about joining our team in London?" I was stunned. "London? I don't know what to say." Sophia smiled. "You don't have to decide right now. Take some time to think about it. But I believe you could do great things with us." As I packed my bags on the last night in Paris, my mind was reeling. The job offer in London, the divorce papers in my briefcase, the life I had left behind in the States, it all swirled in my head like a chaotic storm. I looked out the window at the twinkling lights of Paris. 2 weeks ago, I had arrived here feeling lost and conflicted. Now, I was leaving with a clearer sense of who I was and what I was capable of. As I boarded the plane back to the States, I clutched my briefcase close. Inside were not just the divorce papers, but notes from the conference, business cards from new connections, and the job offer from Sophia. It felt like I was carrying my past and my potential future, all in one hand. The flight attendant's voice crackled over the intercom. "Welcome aboard. We'll be departing for New York shortly." The familiar sights of home greeted me as I stepped out of the taxi, but everything felt different. I was different. With a deep breath, I unlocked the front door, bracing myself for whatever awaited me inside. To my surprise, Mark was there, sitting in the living room as if nothing had changed. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable. "Welcome back," he said, his tone oddly casual. "How was Paris?" I hesitated, caught off guard by his apparent calm. "It was enlightening," I replied carefully. Mark nodded, then stood up and approached me. For a moment, I thought he might hug me, but he stopped short. "Listen, Camille, I've been thinking while you were gone. I think we got off on the wrong foot before you left." My heart raced. Was he about to apologize? To try and make amends? "I'm willing to forgive you," he continued, and my hope deflated instantly. "We can start over, put all this behind us. But there need to be some changes." I felt my jaw clench. "What kind of changes?" "For starters, you need to quit your job," he said, as if it was the most reasonable request in the world. "It's clear that it's causing problems in our marriage. If you stay home, focus on our relationship, everything will be better." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Quit my job? Mark, that's insane. My career is important to me. It's part of who I am. His face hardened. More important than our marriage? Than me? That's not fair, I protested. Why should I have to choose? Because I'm your husband, he shouted, his calm facade cracking. I'm sick of coming second to your ambition. It's time you remembered your place and started acting like a proper wife. In that moment, something inside me snapped. All the frustration, the resentment, the pain of the past months came flooding out. My place? I spat back. And where exactly is that, Mark? Beneath you? Sacrificing everything I've worked for just to stroke your ego? His face contorted with rage. You ungrateful little thing. After everything I've done for you. Everything you've done for me? I interrupted, my voice rising to match his. What about everything I've done for you? I've supported you, cheered you on, put your needs before mine for years. And this is how you repay me? With ultimatums and insults? Mark's eyes widened in shock. I had never spoken to him like this before. Always, I had been the peacemaker, the one to smooth things over. But not anymore. You know what? I said, reaching into my briefcase. I think you're right about one thing. There do need to be changes. I pulled out the divorce papers and slapped them on the coffee table. I've signed them. Now it's your turn. Mark stared at the papers, then back at me. You can't be serious, he sputtered. I've never been more serious in my life, I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. We're done, Mark. I won't let you bully me or belittle me anymore. His face turned an alarming shade of red. You'll regret this, he hissed. I'll make sure you lose everything. Your job, your reputation, everything. I stood my ground, even as fear coursed through me. Go ahead and try. I'm not afraid of you anymore. With a roar of frustration, Mark swept the papers off the table and stormed out of the room. I heard the front door slam a moment later. As the silence settled around me, I sank onto the couch, my legs suddenly weak. I had done it. After years of compromising, of making myself smaller, I had finally stood up for myself. But as the adrenaline faded, anxiety crept in. What would Mark do now? How far would he go to make good on his threats? The next morning, I did what I had been mentally prepared for a long time. The moment I stepped into Sarah's law office, I felt a strange mix of dread and relief. Sarah, my longtime friend turned lawyer, greeted me with a concerned smile. Camille, she said, gesturing for me to sit. I'm glad you called. Tell me everything. I took a deep breath and began recounting the events of the past few weeks, Mark's ultimatum, his threats, the divorce papers. Sarah listened intently, her brow furrowing deeper with each detail. And now he's threatening to destroy my career, I finished, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes serious. Camille, given the nature of his threats, I think we need to dig deeper. Have you considered hiring a private investigator to look into Mark's activities? I couldn't help it, I let out a bitter laugh. Oh, Sarah, I said, reaching for my bag, I'm way ahead of you on that one. I pulled out a thick folder and placed it on her desk. I hired a PI a few months ago. The results, well, they're not pretty. Sarah's eyebrows shot up as she opened the folder. We spent the next hour poring over its contents, and with each page, I watched Sarah's expression shift from shock to disbelief to something akin to triumph. The folder contained a damning collection of evidence against Mark. There were emails and recorded conversations revealing how he had manipulated and undermined his colleagues in his desperate bid to become dean. It was clear that his underhanded tactics had backfired spectacularly. The rector had gotten wind of his behavior and had deliberately chosen the woman Mark had so vehemently criticized for the position instead. But that wasn't the worst of it. As we delved deeper into the folder, we uncovered evidence of Mark's multiple affairs with his students. There were photos, videos, and even audio recordings that left no doubt about his infidelity. The university knew, I explained, my voice hollow. But they decided to cover it up to protect their reputation. Can you believe it? Sarah looked up at me, a slow smile spreading across her face. Camille, this changes everything. With this evidence, we're not just going to win the divorce case. We're going to make sure Mark never threatens you or your career again. As we began to strategize, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. I had been carrying the burden of this knowledge alone for so long, afraid to use it, afraid of the consequences. But now, with Sarah by my side and a clear plan forming, I finally felt like I was taking control of my life again. The 2 weeks leading up to the trial were some of the most stressful of my life. Mark ramped up his campaign of intimidation. My phone buzzed constantly with his threats and demands. You'll be left with nothing, Camille, he snarled in one voicemail. I'll make sure you're penniless and disgraced. Another day, his tone shifted to a disturbing plea. Come back to me, baby. Be a good wife. Stay at home, and I'll forgive everything. Just do what I say. Each message made my skin crawl, but I forced myself to record and document every word. Sarah had advised me to keep a detailed log of his behavior, and I followed her instructions to the letter. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. As we entered the courtroom, I saw Mark for the first time in weeks. He looked confident, even smug, as he took his seat. His lawyer leaned over and whispered something in his ear, and they both chuckled. The proceedings began, and Mark's attorney painted a picture of me as a gold digger, someone who had used Mark for his status and now wanted to rob him blind. Your Honor, he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity, Mrs. Thompson is simply jealous of my client's successful career. This divorce is nothing more than an attempt to cash in on his hard work. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to remain calm. Sarah squeezed my hand reassuringly. Then it was our turn. Sarah stood, her posture radiating confidence. Your Honor, we have evidence that paints a very different picture of this marriage and Mr. Thompson's character. What followed was a systematic dismantling of Mark's facade. Sarah presented the emails showing his underhanded tactics at work, the audio recordings of his threats against me, and finally, the damning evidence of his affairs with students. I watched as the color drained from Mark's face. He began to tremble, his eyes darting around the courtroom as if searching for an escape route. His lawyer looked shell-shocked, frantically whispering in Mark's ear. The judge's expression grew increasingly stern as she reviewed the evidence. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold with disapproval. In light of this evidence, I find Mr. Thompson's behavior reprehensible, she declared. The court rules in favor of Mrs. Thompson. Mr. Thompson will pay financial compensation for his infidelity, and all marital assets will be divided equally. The aftermath of the trial was a whirlwind. News of Mark's affairs spread quickly, and the university was forced to address the scandal. Despite their previous attempts to cover it up, they had no choice but to terminate Mark's contract. His reputation in academia was in tatters. Meanwhile, I threw myself into my work with renewed energy. My boss, impressed by my resilience and professional conduct throughout the ordeal, offered me the position of CFO. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I ran into Sarah. She grinned when she saw me. Look at you, CFO Thompson. How does it feel? I smiled back, feeling a warmth in my chest. It feels right, Sarah. For the first time in a long time, everything feels right. As we walked together, chatting about the future, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The storm had passed, and I had not only survived, but emerged stronger. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew I was ready to face them head-on. My name is Andrea, and I've been a professional massage therapist for over a decade now. For the past 8 years, I've also been a wife, though sometimes I wonder if that role suits me as well as my career does. I'm 35, with dark hair that's usually tied back in a practical ponytail, and hands that have become strong and skilled from years of working on tense muscles. I specialize in sports massage, helping athletes recover from injuries and improve their performance. It's demanding work, but I love the challenge. There's something deeply satisfying about feeling the knots in someone's muscles give way under my fingers, knowing I'm helping them heal and reach their full potential. My husband, Tom, doesn't quite get it. He's 37, works as an office clerk, and his idea of a good time is lounging on the couch with a beer, watching whatever game is on TV. He's not a bad guy, really. Just different from me. Andrea, why don't you take a break? Tom called from the living room as I pored over my accounts one evening. Come watch the game with me. I sighed, rubbing my temples. I can't, Tom. I'm trying to figure out how much more I need to save for the office space. He appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with a slight frown. You're always working. We should be enjoying life, not killing ourselves for some future that might never come. This is important to me, I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. I want my own business, my own space. I'm tired of working for other people. This was a familiar dance between us. We'd reached a compromise of sorts over the years. We each contributed a set amount to our shared expenses, and whatever was left was ours to spend, or save, as we saw fit. It wasn't perfect, but it allowed me to squirrel away money for my future business without constant arguments. The apartment we lived in was a wedding gift from my father. It wasn't large, but it was in a good neighborhood and, most importantly, it was ours free and clear. No mortgage meant I could focus on saving for my business instead of paying for a roof over our heads. The next morning, I was up early as usual, preparing for another long day of appointments at the 2 clinics where I worked. As I sipped my coffee, Tom stumbled into the kitchen, bleary-eyed and yawning. You're up early, he mumbled, reaching for the coffee pot. Oh, by the way, my mom called yesterday. She and Sarah want to book a wellness course with you. I froze, my mug halfway to my lips. My mother-in-law, Evelyn, and her daughter, Tom's sister, Sarah were, well, let's just say they weren't my favorite people. Did you tell them I'd do it? Tom looked surprised. Of course. Why wouldn't you? They're family. I bit back a sigh. This was going to be a problem, I could feel it. But I forced a smile and nodded. Right. Family. I'll fit them in somewhere. The day Evelyn and Sarah came for their wellness course was the beginning of a nightmare I couldn't have anticipated. They sauntered into my clinic like they owned the place, designer handbags swinging from their arms. Andrea, darling, Evelyn's voice was saccharine sweet. We're so excited for our spa day. I forced a smile. It's not exactly a spa day, Evelyn. This is a therapeutic massage course. Sarah rolled her eyes. Same difference. Let's get started, shall we? I have a hair appointment later. I gritted my teeth and led them to the treatment room. For the next 2 hours, I worked on relieving Evelyn's chronic back pain and Sarah's tension headaches. I used every technique in my arsenal, determined to give them the best possible treatment despite their attitude. As we finished up, Evelyn stretched languidly. Oh, that was lovely. We'll have to do this again soon. Great, I said, reaching for my appointment book. When would you like to schedule your next session? It will cost. Andrea, Evelyn cut me off, her voice suddenly cold. We're family. Surely you're not expecting us to pay for this? My jaw dropped. What? Of course, I expect payment. This is my job, Evelyn. Well, I never, Evelyn huffed. Tom will hear about this. Come on, Sarah. They swept out of the clinic, leaving me stunned and angry. I knew I should have seen this coming, but their audacity still caught me off guard. That night, I confronted Tom about it. Your mother and sister came in for treatments today, I began, trying to keep my voice level. They refused to pay. Tom looked up from his phone, surprised. Well, maybe you should have just given it to them as a gift. They are family, after all. The following weeks brought more frustrations. Evelyn started calling regularly, complaining about various aches and pains, hinting heavily that I should help out. Sarah took to dropping by unannounced on weekends, kids in tow. "Andrea, be a dear and watch the kids for a few hours," she'd say, already halfway out the door. "I've got a mani-pedi appointment." I tried to protest, to set boundaries, but Tom always sided with them. "They're family," he'd say, as if that explained and excused everything. One Saturday, after Sarah had once again left her children with me without warning, I confronted Tom. "This has to stop," I said firmly. "I'm not a free babysitter or on-call masseuse. You need to talk to your sister." Tom's face darkened. "Andrea, they're my family. I expect you to be loyal and obedient. That's what a good wife does." I stared at him, really seeing him for perhaps the first time in our marriage. This man, who I'd loved for 8 years, didn't understand me at all. He didn't support my dreams, didn't respect my work. To him, I was just an extension of his family, expected to fall in line with their demands. The following weeks were a blur of work and tension at home. I threw myself into my job, working longer hours at the clinics and squirreling away every penny I could. Tom and I barely spoke, the silence between us growing heavier with each passing day. Then, on a rainy Tuesday morning, I received a call that shattered my world. My father had passed away suddenly in his sleep. The phone slipped from my numb fingers as the news washed over me like a tidal wave of grief. I don't remember much of the next few days. I moved through the motions of arranging the funeral, greeting distant relatives, accepting condolences. Tom was there, a silent presence at my side, but I felt more alone than ever. It wasn't until after the funeral, sitting in my father's lawyer's office, that I began to surface from my fog of grief. "Andrea," the lawyer said gently, "your father left you his house. Everything is in order, the property is yours free and clear." I blinked, struggling to process this information. The house, my childhood home, filled with memories of happier times. I hadn't even thought about what would happen to it. As we left the lawyer's office, Tom spoke up for the first time. "This is great, Andrea. Think of all the space we'll have. We could throw some amazing parties." I tuned him out, my mind whirling. The house represented both a gift and a burden. It was too big for just the two of us, and the thought of the upkeep was daunting. But I couldn't bear the thought of selling it either. Every room held echoes of my father's laughter, his encouragement, his love. "I think we should rent it out," I said abruptly, cutting off Tom's excited chatter about remodeling plans. Tom's face fell. "Rent it out? But Andrea, think of the opportunities." "I have thought about it," I interrupted. "This is what I want to do. It's my house, Tom." He sulked for days after that, but I stood firm. I found a reputable rental agency and signed a contract with them. It felt like the right decision, giving me time to grieve and consider my options without making any rash choices. A week later, I received a call from the agency that left me bewildered. They informed me that they couldn't access the property. Apparently, some tenants were occupying the house and refusing to let them in. I was shocked. Who could these people be? How did they get into my father's house? A mix of confusion and anger swirled inside me as I grabbed my car keys. I had to see this for myself. As I pulled up to my father's house, my heart was pounding. The familiar sight of the old Victorian-style home, with its wraparound porch and faded blue paint, brought a rush of memories. But those nostalgic feelings were quickly overshadowed by my growing anger and confusion. I marched up to the front door and knocked forcefully. "Hello?" I called out. "This is my property. I demand to know who's in there." The door creaked open, and I found myself face to face with my mother-in-law, Evelyn, flanked by her daughter Sarah and Sarah's children. "Andrea, dear," Evelyn exclaimed, her voice sickly sweet. "What a surprise to see you here." I struggled to find words, my mouth opening and closing silently before I finally managed to speak. What are you doing here? How did you get in?" Evelyn's smile didn't falter. "Oh, Tom gave us the keys. He said we could live here and look after the place. Isn't that thoughtful of him?" My blood began to boil. Without a word, I pulled out my phone and dialed Tom's number. He answered on the third ring. "Hey, what's up?" "Tom," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained rage, "why are your mother and sister living in my father's house?" There was a pause, then a sigh. "Look, Andrea, they needed a place to stay. Their old rental got sold, and they had nowhere to go. I knew the house was empty, so you gave them the keys without asking me?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "Tom, I signed a contract with a rental agency. There are tenants supposed to be moving in." "Andrea, their family," Tom said, his tone growing stern. "They'll live there and look after the place. It's better than having strangers in it." "This is my house, Tom," I said through gritted teeth. "You had no right to make this decision without me. You need to come here right now and sort this out." "I'm busy," he replied curtly. "You're overreacting. Just let them stay." With that, he hung up. I stared at my phone in disbelief, then turned back to Evelyn and Sarah. "This isn't your house, and you have no right to be here. I'm asking you nicely to leave. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." Sarah let out a harsh laugh. "Or what? You'll call the cops on your own family?" I met her gaze steadily. "If I have to, yes." For a moment, we all stood in tense silence. Then, without warning, Evelyn and Sarah burst into laughter. Before I could react, they stepped back and slammed the door in my face. I stood there, stunned, staring at the closed door of my own house. The audacity, the disrespect, it was too much. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone again and dialed 911. When the police arrived, I explained the situation as calmly as I could. To my relief, they understood and took my side. They knocked on the door and, when Evelyn answered, explained that she and her family had no legal right to be there. "Ma'am," one officer said firmly, "this property belongs to Andrea Thompson. You need to vacate the premises immediately." Evelyn's face contorted with anger. She turned to me, her eyes blazing. "You've crossed a line, Andrea," she spat. "You'll regret this, mark my words." As the police continued to insist they leave, Evelyn pulled out her phone. I watched as she dialed and put the phone to her ear. "Tom," she said, her voice suddenly trembling. "You need to come here right now. Your wife has called the police on us. We're not leaving until you get here and teach her some obedience." I watched in disbelief as Tom's car screeched to a halt in front of the house. He'd refused to come when I called, claiming he was too busy, but here he was, rushing to his mother's aid. Tom strode up to the porch, his face a mask of anger. "What's going on here?" he demanded. Evelyn burst into tears at the sight of her son. "Oh, Tom, your wife has called the police on us. We have nowhere to go." I tried to interject, to explain the situation, but Tom held up a hand to silence me. He wrapped his arms around his sobbing mother, shooting me a glare over her shoulder. "It's okay, Mom," he said soothingly. "I won't let you be out on the street. You can all come stay with us in our apartment." I stared at him, shocked. "Tom, you can't be serious. Our apartment is tiny. There's no room." "Well," he cut me off, his voice cold. "Since you don't want to be nice, things are going to have to get uncomfortable. You brought this on yourself, Andrea." And just like that, my life turned into a living hell. Our small apartment wasn't designed to house so many people. Evelyn, Sarah, and Sarah's 3 children moved in, turning our once peaceful home into chaos. The living room became a makeshift bedroom, with air mattresses taking up every inch of floor space. Privacy became a distant memory. The noise was constant. Sarah's children, aged 4, 6, and 8, seemed to be in a competition to see who could scream the loudest. They ran through the apartment like tornadoes, leaving destruction in their wake. One afternoon, I returned from work to find our TV smashed on the floor. The eldest boy had been trying to reach something on top of the entertainment center and had pulled the whole thing down. Kids will be kids, Sarah shrugged when I confronted her about it. The mess was overwhelming. Toys littered every surface, dirty dishes piled up in the sink, and laundry seemed to multiply overnight. Yet somehow, I was expected to clean it all up. When I protested, Tom would step in. "Come on, Andrea. You're the lady of the house. It's your job to make our guests comfortable." "Guests?" I would sputter. "They've taken over our home." But my protests fell on deaf ears. Tom, Evelyn, and Sarah had formed a united front against me. They criticized my cooking, complained about the cleanliness of the apartment, and made constant demands on my time and energy. I felt like a servant in my own home, constantly cooking, cleaning, and catering to their whims. The dreams of opening my own massage therapy business seemed to be slipping further away with each passing day. 2 months dragged by, each day blending into the next in a blur of exhaustion and frustration. Sleep became a luxury I could rarely afford. Between the constant demands of Tom's family and the noise that seemed to permeate every corner of our small apartment, I found myself constantly on edge, never able to truly relax. One Friday, after a particularly grueling week at work, I reached my breaking point. The thought of returning to the madhouse that was now my home filled me with dread. Without really thinking it through, I decided to stay at my office overnight. The quiet solitude of the empty clinic was a balm to my frayed nerves, and for the first time in months, I slept deeply and peacefully. The next morning, feeling somewhat refreshed, I steeled myself and headed home. As soon as I walked through the door, I knew something was wrong. Tom was waiting for me, his face a mask of fury. "Where the hell have you been?" he demanded, not even giving me a chance to speak. "You didn't come home last night. You didn't cook dinner. You've completely abandoned your responsibilities." I tried to explain, to defend myself, but Tom wasn't interested in listening. "I've had enough," he spat. "You're neglectful, disobedient, and clearly don't care about this family. I want a divorce." Before I could process what was happening, Tom thrust a stack of papers into my hands. Divorce papers. Already signed by him. "I'll be demanding half of everything," he said coldly. "Now get out. I don't want to look at you anymore." With that, he pushed me out of the apartment and slammed the door in my face. I stood there, stunned, clutching the divorce papers and fighting back tears. In a daze, I made my way to my father's lawyer's office. As I explained the situation, the kind old man who had known my family for years listened patiently. "Andrea," he said gently when I finished, "I want you to take a deep breath and relax. Your soon-to-be ex-husband has no claim on your property. Both the house and the apartment were gifted to you by your father before your marriage. They're yours, free and clear." Relief washed over me, but it was quickly followed by a wave of exhaustion. As I left the lawyer's office, I found myself driving towards my father's house, my house now, I reminded myself. I made my way to my father's study, a room that had always been a sanctuary of sorts. As I began to sort through the papers on his desk, a sealed envelope caught my eye. It was addressed to me, in my father's familiar handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened the letter and began to read. "My dearest Andrea, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you. I want you to know how proud I am of the woman you've become. You've always had such drive, such passion for your work. I've watched you pour your heart and soul into your dream of owning your own massage therapy business. I'm writing this to tell you to follow your heart, Andrea. Trust yourself. You have the skills, the determination, and the compassion to make your dream a reality. To help you on your way, I want you to sell this house. Use the money to open that salon you've always talked about. I know it might be hard to let go of this place and all the memories it holds, but I want you to create new memories, new successes. Remember, I will always be with you, cheering you on. Go make your dreams come true, my darling daughter. All my love. Dad." Tears streamed down my face as I finished reading. Even now, months after his passing, my father was still supporting me, still believing in me. With renewed energy, I picked up the divorce papers Tom had thrust at me. Without hesitation, I signed my name next to his. This chapter of my life was over, and I was ready to start a new one. The next morning, I marched into the mayor's office and filed the divorce papers. As I walked out, I felt as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I was free. My next stop was my realtor friend, Sarah's office. Within weeks, both my father's house and the apartment were sold. The proceeds were more than I had dared to hope for. With Sarah's help, I found the perfect space for my massage parlor, a large, airy room in a bustling part of town. I poured my heart into transforming it, choosing soothing colors and comfortable furnishings. Every piece of equipment I purchased felt like a step closer to my dream. My final task was finding a new place to live. I fell in love with a small, cozy apartment just a few blocks from my new salon. It was perfect, a fresh start, close to my new business. As I was moving my things into my new apartment, I received a frantic call from my former neighbor. New tenants had shown up at my old apartment, much to the shock of Tom and his family. I couldn't help but smile as I imagined their confusion and panic as they scrambled to pack up and leave. It wasn't long before my phone rang again. This time, it was Tom. "Andrea, what's going on?" he demanded. "Why are there strangers in our apartment? And why did I get a notice from the mayor's office about our divorce being finalized?" I took a deep breath. "It's not our apartment anymore, Tom. I sold it. And yes, the divorce is final. This is what you wanted, remember?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Tom spoke again, his voice had softened. "Andrea, I was just joking about the divorce. I love you. We can work this out. I'll tell Mom and Sarah to move out. Please, just come home." "No, Tom," I said firmly. "This isn't about your mother or sister anymore. This is about us. You've shown me exactly who you are and what you think of me. I deserve better than that." With that, I hung up and blocked his number. As I looked around my new apartment, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. This was my space, my life, on my terms. A year has passed since I took that leap of faith and opened my own massage therapy salon. As I stand in the reception area, watching clients come and go, I can hardly believe how much has changed. My little salon has flourished beyond my wildest dreams. Word of mouth spread quickly about the quality of our treatments, and soon we were the talk of the town. My appointment book, once filled with blank spaces and hope, is now packed solid for months in advance. I've had to hire 3 additional therapists to keep up with demand. As I watch them work, guiding clients through their treatments with skill and compassion, I feel a surge of pride. This is what I've built, what I've nurtured. It's more than just a business, it's a place of healing, of renewal. Financially, I'm more secure than I've ever been. The constant stress of pinching pennies and sacrificing my own needs for others is a distant memory. I can afford to pay myself and my staff well, invest in top-quality equipment, and even set aside a healthy chunk for savings and future expansion. But more than the financial success, it's the freedom that I cherish most. The freedom to make my own decisions, to shape my business and my life according to my own vision. No more compromising my dreams to appease others. No more putting my own needs last. I've heard through the grapevine about Tom and his family. Apparently, they're all crammed into a rented apartment across town. The reports aren't pretty: constant bickering, financial struggles, and a general air of misery. Part of me feels a twinge of sympathy, remembering the good times Tom and I once shared. But then I remember how he treated me, how he allowed his family to steamroll over my needs and dreams, and the sympathy fades. As I enter my apartment, I'm greeted by blessed silence. No screaming children, no demanding in-laws, no sulking husband. Just peace, and the freedom to spend my evening however I choose. My phone buzzes with a text from Lisa, my assistant, a last-minute booking request from a client in pain. Without hesitation, I tell her to schedule them in. This is why I do what I do, to help, to heal, to make a difference. As I head to bed that night, I pass by the photo of my father on my nightstand. His proud smile seems to glow in the dim light. "We did it, Dad," I whisper, touching the frame gently. "We really did it." I fall asleep with a smile on my face, excited for what tomorrow will bring. This is the life I've always dreamed of, challenging, fulfilling, and entirely my own. And I wouldn't have it any other way. My name's Amber, and I've got a story to tell you. I was married for years to Jake. We had a son, Tommy, who'd finished college and was working some office job downtown. He'd moved out a while back, renting his own place. Jake and I both worked at Steinman Financials. I was the deputy chief accountant, and he was in the finance department. Before we got hitched, we signed a prenup. It said if we ever split, whoever's name was on the property kept it, and we'd split the cash down the middle. Seemed fair at the time. We bought an apartment first, put it in my name. Then we got a house, put that in Jake's. We each had our own car. I always did the shopping for furniture and stuff. Jake hated it, even online shopping. So I kept all the receipts, being an accountant and all. Never knew when they might come in handy. Lately, Jake had been obsessing over our retirement. He'd spend hours poring over financial news, muttering about inflation and the rising cost of living. "Have you seen gas prices lately?" he'd grumble over breakfast. "And don't even get me started on groceries. How are we supposed to retire comfortably at this rate?" I'd try to reassure him, but he was like a dog with a bone. He'd research get-rich-quick schemes, always looking for that magic bullet. One day, he came home excited about day trading. "Amber, I think I found our ticket," he said, waving his tablet at me. "Look at these stock charts. If we play it right, we could double our money in no time." I shook my head. "Jake, that's too risky. We can't gamble with our savings." He sulked for days after that, but I stood firm. We needed stability, not high-risk ventures. One evening, Jake suggested we take a walk. The air was crisp, and the streets were quiet. As we strolled, he started talking about retirement again. "You know, Amber," he said, his voice low and conspiratorial, "there's a way we could make a few $100,000 easy. Set ourselves up for a cushy retirement." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? How's that?" He leaned in closer. "We could siphon some money from the company accounts. I can set up the transfers and finance, make them look legit. You just need to push them through in accounting." I stopped dead in my tracks. "Are you serious right now? That's theft, Jake. We could go to jail." He held up his hands, laughing suddenly. "Whoa, calm down. I was just joking. Testing your honesty, you know?" I relaxed a bit, but something felt off. "That's not funny, Jake. Don't joke about stuff like that." Sorry, he said, still chuckling. "Come on, let's head back." We walked home in silence, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in my gut. Something had changed, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Life went on as usual after that night, but something had shifted. I couldn't put my finger on it, but Jake seemed different. More distant, maybe. I tried to brush it off as stress from work. One day, our chief accountant quit unexpectedly. The company wasted no time in hiring a replacement. Her name was Vivian, and she waltzed into our office like she owned the place. Young, beautiful, and oozing confidence, she made quite an entrance. "Listen up, everyone," she announced on her first day. "Things are going to change around here. I expect nothing but the best from my team." Her eyes lingered on me a bit too long, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Something told me she wasn't happy about having me as her deputy. I was right. Over the next few weeks, Vivian made my life hell. She'd criticize my work constantly, making me redo reports multiple times for the tiniest errors. A few days later, during a management meeting, I noticed a glaring error in Vivian's calculations. I hesitated, not wanting to embarrass her, but my sense of duty won out. "Excuse me," I said, my voice shaky. "I think there's a mistake in these numbers. The quarterly projections. They don't add up." The company director, Mr. Steinman, leaned forward. "Is this true, Vivian?" Vivian's face turned beet red. She snatched the report from me, scanned it quickly, then forced a smile. "It seems there was a small oversight. Thank you, Amber, for catching that." The words dripped with venom. As soon as the meeting ended, she cornered me in her office. "Listen here, you old hag," she snarled, all pretense of professionalism gone. "I don't care how long you've been here. I'm in charge now, and I'm going to make your life miserable until you quit." I stood my ground. "I won't quit. I've done nothing wrong." She laughed, a cold, harsh sound. "We'll see about that. You're on thin ice, Amber. One wrong move, and you're out." As I left her office, I felt a mix of fear and determination. I'd worked too hard to let some young upstart push me out. The next few weeks were a nightmare. Vivian seemed to be on a personal mission to make my life miserable. She'd pile work on my desk minutes before I was supposed to leave, criticize every little thing I did, and make snide comments in front of the whole team. I tried to keep my head down and do my job, but it was getting harder every day. Jake wasn't much help either. He'd come home late, barely talk during dinner, and spend most of his time glued to his phone. One particularly rough day, I decided to stay late to finish up some reports. The office was quiet, most people had gone home. As I was about to leave, I heard voices coming from Vivian's office. Curiosity got the better of me, and I crept closer to listen. "Everything's going according to plan," I heard Vivian say. "That old bag won't know what hit her." A man's voice responded, but it was too low for me to make out the words. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure they'd hear it. Just then, the door started to open. I bolted, nearly dropping my purse in my haste to get to the elevator. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of a man leaving Vivian's office. I couldn't see his face, but something about his build seemed familiar. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Who was Vivian talking to? What were they planning? And why did that man seem familiar? The next morning, I was called into Mr. Steinman's office. My stomach dropped as I saw Vivian standing there, a triumphant smirk on her face. "Amber," Mr. Steinman began, his voice grave. "I'm afraid we have to let you go." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "What? Why?" "Vivian has brought some concerns to my attention," he said, not meeting my eyes. "She feels you're not performing up to our standards." I tried to argue, to explain how Vivian had been treating me unfairly, how she could be harming the company. But Mr. Steinman wouldn't budge. "Vivian comes highly recommended," he said. "A good friend of mine vouched for her. I trust his judgment." As I stood there, shell-shocked, Mr. Steinman's expression softened slightly. "Look, Amber. I appreciate your years of service. I'll make sure you get the maximum possible bonus. It's usually reserved for upper management, but I think you've earned it." I nodded numbly, barely hearing his words. As I turned to leave, Vivian's voice stopped me. "Don't forget to clear out your desk," she said sweetly. "We wouldn't want you to leave anything important behind." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the malice behind her perfect smile. In that moment, I knew this was personal. But why? What had I ever done to her? When I got home, the house was empty. I called Jake, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message, my voice breaking as I explained what had happened. As I sat on our couch, staring at the walls, I felt lost. My job had been such a big part of my identity. Who was I without it? The next few months were a whirlwind. At first, I tried to enjoy my unexpected vacation. I threw myself into home projects, finally tackling that renovation I'd been putting off for years. One evening, as I was putting the finishing touches on our newly renovated living room, Jake came home with a gleam in his eye. "Amber," he said, excitement clear in his voice, "I've got an idea. Let's buy a new house." I blinked at him, paintbrush still in hand. "What? We just finished renovating this one." He waved dismissively. "Yeah, but think about it. With all the work you've done, we could sell this place for a fortune. Add in a bit more cash, and we could get a real luxury home. There's one for sale just a few blocks over, it's got a pool and everything." I hesitated. "I don't know, Jake. We've put so much work into this place." "Come on, Amber," he pressed. "I've already got a buyer lined up for this house. All we need to do is sell your apartment, you know, the one we've been renting out. And we'll have more than enough." Something about his eagerness set off alarm bells in my head. But I pushed the feeling aside. This was Jake, my husband. If I couldn't trust him, who could I trust? "Okay," I said finally. "Let's do it." The next few weeks were a blur of real estate agents, paperwork, and packing. I sold my apartment, putting the money into our joint account as Jake suggested. It felt strange, letting go of a place that had been mine for so long, but Jake's enthusiasm was infectious. The day before we were set to move, Jake came home early. "Hey, honey," he called out. "I need you to do me a favor. Can you give the place a real deep clean? I'm bringing someone over tonight to see the house." I spent the day scrubbing and polishing, making sure every surface gleamed. By evening, I was exhausted but satisfied. The house looked better than it ever had. As I heard a car pull up outside, I smoothed down my hair and straightened my clothes. Time to make a good impression on our buyer. The front door opened, and I plastered on my best smile. But as Jake walked in, followed by his guest, my smile froze on my face. It was Vivian. She sauntered in, her eyes roaming over the house with a proprietary air. Then her gaze landed on me, and a slow, cruel smile spread across her face. Well, she drawled. "Looks like the maid service has already been here." I stood there, stunned, as she turned to Jake. "You were right, darling. It's perfect." "Darling?" I looked at Jake, praying for some kind of explanation. But the look on his face told me everything I needed to know. "Amber," he said, his voice cold and unfamiliar. "I want a divorce." The room spun around me as I tried to process Jake's words. "Divorce? And with Vivian? What's going on?" I managed to choke out. Jake's face was set in a hard line. "It's simple, Amber. I love Vivian. We want to be together." Vivian draped herself over Jake, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "That's right, honey. I'm not just taking your job. I'm taking your husband too." I felt like I was in some kind of twisted nightmare. "How long?" I whispered. Jake at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "A while," he admitted. "But that's not important now. What's important is that we part ways, amicably." I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Amicably? You've been cheating on me, and you want amicable?" He held up his hands. "Look, I'm trying to be fair here. We'll split all the money in the joint accounts 50-50, just like the prenup says. I'll keep the house, since it's in my name. Clean break." My mind was reeling, but something clicked into place. The apartment sale, the rush to move, it had all been part of their plan. "You manipulated me," I said, my voice growing stronger. "You made me sell my apartment so you could get your hands on more cash." Jake shrugged, not even bothering to deny it. "It's just business, Amber. Nothing personal." I saw red. "Nothing personal? This is my life you're destroying." Vivian laughed, a cold, cruel sound. "Oh, honey. Your life was already over. You're just too pathetic to realize it." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. "Fine," I said, my voice steady. "I'll go. But I'm taking what's mine." Jake looked relieved. Sure, whatever. Just be out by morning. I nodded, then turned and walked calmly to the phone. Jake and Vivian watched, puzzled, as I dialed. Hello, Speedy Movers? I need a team here first thing in the morning. Yes, it's a full house move. Jake's face darkened. What are you doing? I smiled, a cold, hard smile that felt foreign on my face. I'm taking what's mine, Jake. Every single thing I bought for this house. Hope you and your mistress enjoy your empty love nest. The look of shock on their faces was almost worth the pain of the past few hours. Almost. As I headed upstairs to pack my personal belongings, I heard them arguing in fierce whispers. Let them fight, I thought. I had work to do. I spent the night sorting through papers, gathering every receipt I'd saved over the years. By morning, I had a clear inventory of everything that legally belonged to me. When the movers arrived, Jake tried to stop them, yelling about the prenup. But I calmly showed them the receipts and the clause in our agreement stating that individually purchased items remained the property of the buyer. Item by item, the house was emptied. Furniture, appliances, even the food in the fridge, all loaded into the moving van. Jake and Vivian watched in horrified silence as their perfect plan crumbled around them. As the last box was loaded, I turned to face them one last time. Jake looked shell-shocked, while Vivian's face was contorted with rage. Enjoy your new life, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. I'm sure it'll be everything you dreamed of. The next few days were a blur of activity. I rented a small storage unit for my belongings and checked into a modest hotel. My mind was racing, trying to process everything that had happened and figure out my next move. On the second day, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a lawyer, representing Jake. Mrs. Thompson, he said, his voice cold and professional, I'm calling to inform you that your actions regarding the removal of property from your marital home were illegal. My client demands the immediate return of all items. I laughed, surprising even myself with how steady my voice was. I don't think so. Everything I took, I purchased. I have the receipts to prove it. The lawyer paused, clearly not expecting this response. Nevertheless, the prenuptial agreement. The prenup states that individually purchased items remain the property of the buyer, I interrupted. You're welcome to review it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have my own legal matters to attend to. I hung up, my heart pounding. I knew this was far from over, but I felt a small thrill of victory. For once, I was fighting back. That evening, I called my son, Tommy. I hadn't told him about the divorce yet, and my heart ached at the thought of breaking the news. Mom, he answered, his voice concerned. Is everything okay? I'd been trying to reach Dad, but he's not answering. I took a deep breath. Tommy, there's something I need to tell you. Your father and I, we're getting a divorce. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, what? Why? What happened? I explained as best I could, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice, for Tommy's sake. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. I'm so sorry, Mom, he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. What can I do? Do you need a place to stay? I smiled, grateful for his support. No, honey, I'm okay for now. But there is something you could do for me. I explained my plan, feeling a twinge of guilt for involving Tommy. But I needed someone I could trust completely, and who better than my own son? Tommy agreed without hesitation. I'll do whatever you need, Mom. Dad, he's made his choice. I'm on your side. As I hung up, I felt a mix of emotions. Sadness for the family we once were, anger at Jake's betrayal, but also a fierce determination. I had been knocked down, but I wasn't out. Not by a long shot. I pulled out a notebook and began to write, outlining my plan. Jake and Vivian thought they had won, but they had no idea what was coming. I was going to take back everything they had stolen from me, my job, my dignity, and my future. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Tommy, true to his word, moved back into Jake's house, claiming he wanted to support his father during this difficult time. Jake, caught off guard by this unexpected show of filial loyalty, welcomed him with open arms. Little did Jake know that Tommy was my eyes and ears inside the house. Every night, we'd talk on the phone, and he'd fill me in on what he'd discovered. "Mom, you won't believe this," Tommy whispered one night. "I managed to get into Dad's computer. There are emails between him and Vivian going back months. They'd been planning this for a long time." My heart clenched, but I pushed the pain aside. "What else did you find?" Tommy's voice dropped even lower. "There are some weird financial documents. I don't understand most of it, but it looks shady." I felt a spark of hope. This could be the break I needed. "Can you make copies?" "Already done," Tommy said. "I'll drop them off at your hotel tomorrow." True to his word, Tommy delivered a USB drive filled with documents the next day. As I pored over the files, my accountant's brain kicked into high gear. The more I read, the more my suspicions grew. There were discrepancies in the company's financial reports, money moving between accounts that shouldn't exist. And at the center of it all were Jake and Vivian's names. I remembered Jake's joke about embezzling money from the company. It seemed it wasn't a joke after all. Armed with this information, I knew it was time to make my move. I called my lawyer, explaining what I had found. "This is serious, Amber," he said, his voice grave. "If what you're saying is true, we're looking at major fraud. But we need more concrete evidence." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I understand. What do you suggest?" "We need to get the company involved," he said. "If we can prove that Jake and Vivian have been stealing from Steinman Financials, it could change everything in your divorce proceedings." The next day, I marched into Steinman Financials, my head held high. As I walked through the familiar corridors, I could feel the stares of my former colleagues. Some looked sympathetic, others curious, but I ignored them all. I knocked on Mr. Steinman's door, my heart pounding. "Come in," his voice called out. As I stepped into his office, his eyes widened in surprise. "Amber, what are you doing here?" I took a deep breath. "Mr. Steinman, I need to talk to you. It's about Jake and Vivian. And it's about your company." For the next hour, I laid out everything I had discovered. The suspicious transfers, the hidden accounts, the discrepancies in the reports. Mr. Steinman's face grew increasingly pale as I spoke. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he reached for his phone. "Get me the head of security and our legal team. Now." He looked back at me, his expression a mix of anger and gratitude. "Amber, I owe you an apology. And a thank you. If what you're saying is true, you may have saved this company from disaster." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity at Steinman Financials. Mr. Steinman, acting on the information I'd provided, ordered an urgent audit of the company's accounts. The results were shocking, even to me. The auditors confirmed what I'd suspected: money was indeed being siphoned from the company's accounts to unknown destinations. The total amount stolen was staggering, approximately $400,000. I felt sick to my stomach thinking about how long this must have been going on right under my nose. A large-scale investigation followed, involving not just the company's internal team, but also external forensic accountants and law enforcement. As the evidence mounted, there was no doubt left: Jake and Vivian were guilty of extensive fraud. I watched from the sidelines as their world came crashing down. Police officers arrived at the office one morning, leading both Jake and Vivian away in handcuffs. Their property and accounts were seized, and a criminal case was opened for economic crimes. Despite the satisfaction of seeing justice served, the aftermath was messy and painful. Because of the prenuptial agreement we'd signed years ago, I couldn't reclaim the money from the apartment I'd sold. Instead, those funds, along with our other joint accounts, were split equally between us. The house, being in Jake's name, remained his property. However, my lawyer fought hard, and we managed to secure some victories. I received financial compensation from Jake amounting to 50% of our house's value, plus lifelong alimony. It wasn't everything I'd hoped for, but it was something. But I wasn't done. I went after Vivian too, demanding compensation for the trauma and financial loss I'd suffered due to her actions. The court sided with me, ordering her to pay over $35,000 in damages. In the end, Jake and Vivian received suspended sentences for their fraud. All their property was confiscated, leaving them deep in debt. The court also barred them from holding any senior positions in the future. Their careers, like their reputations, were in tatters. As I left the courthouse after the final hearing, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, anger, but also hope. The past few months had been a nightmare, but I'd come through it stronger than ever. I'd uncovered a major fraud, reclaimed my reputation, and secured my financial future. With a substantial amount of money in my bank account, I decided it was time for a fresh start. After weeks of searching, I found the perfect place, a small house with a cozy garden on the outskirts of town. It was nothing like the lavish home I'd shared with Jake, but as I stood on the porch, looking out at the neat rows of flowers and vegetables, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. I threw myself into renovating the house, making it truly mine. I painted the walls in warm, cheerful colors, installed bookshelves for my growing collection, and set up a small home office overlooking the garden. Tommy visited often, helping me with the heavier work and just keeping me company. One evening, as we sat on the porch swing I'd installed, sipping lemonade, he turned to me with a smile. "You know, Mom, I'm really proud of you," he said. "After everything that happened, look at you now. You're amazing." I felt my eyes well up with tears. "Thank you, honey. That means more to me than you know." As I settled into my new life, I received an unexpected call from Mr. Steinman. "Amber," he said, his voice warm. "I hope you're doing well. I have a proposition for you." It turned out that after the dust had settled from the fraud scandal, Steinman Financials was in need of a new chief accountant. And they wanted me. "Your work in uncovering the fraud was exemplary," Mr. Steinman said. "We need someone with your skills and integrity. Plus, there's a substantial bonus in it for you, as a thank you for saving the company from ruin." I was speechless. After a moment, I found my voice. "Mr. Steinman, I don't know what to say. Thank you. I'd be honored." My first day back at the office was surreal. As I walked through the doors, not as a disgraced former employee, but as the new chief accountant, I held my head high. My former colleagues greeted me with smiles and congratulations. Mr. Steinman met me in the lobby, a broad smile on his face. To my surprise, he pulled me into a hug. "Welcome back, Amber," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're lucky to have you." As I settled into my new role, I felt a sense of satisfaction I hadn't experienced in years. I was doing work I loved, surrounded by people who respected me. The financial bonus was generous, allowing me to pay off my new house and set aside a nest egg for the future. In the evenings, I'd return to my little house, tend to my garden, and relax on the porch swing. Sometimes Tommy would join me, other times I'd enjoy the solitude. I started taking classes at the local community college, art, literature, even a cooking course. For the first time in years, I was focusing on my own growth and happiness.